Trevor Haynes, a man posing as HOA security, strode onto the river's yard and struck Hannah across the face, shattering a peaceful Texas afternoon. In a flash, Marcus Rivers, a retired Navy SEAL, felt the old combat surge ignite as he stepped between his wounded wife and three men in fake uniforms. Neighbors froze, phones shaking in their hands as this quiet street turned into a battlefield. How could imposters terrorize families in broad daylight? And who is really pulling the strings behind them? Hit like and share. If you believe a neighborhood should never bow to fear, now follow Marcus as this fight for justice explodes. I remember the heat first, late afternoon in Cedar Creek, the kind of Texas heat that makes the air hum and the sidewalks smell like warm dust. Kids were looping lazy circles on their bikes. Mrs. Reynolds was watering her petunias in a straw hat that looked a size too big. Someone down the block had a radio on old country drifting over the fences. It felt safe, ordinary, like nothing bad could push its way in. Hannah Rivers was doing what she always did when the light turned soft, trimming the roses along her front walk. White cotton dress, garden gloves, a small pile of clippings at her feet. I'd seen her out there plenty since she and her husband moved in, always polite, always quick with a wave. You could tell they came here for some peace. Folks said her husband Marcus had been Navy SEAL 20 years, maybe more. You don't ask a man like that for stories. You just nod and say welcome. I was coiling my hose when I spotted him, a man coming up the sidewalk like he owned it. Polo shirt the color of a bruised sky, a stitched HOA badge that looked too shiny to be real, a plastic clipboard hugged to his chest. He walked like trouble eyes, narrowed chin forward, not a hint of hello. Later I'd learn his name, Trevor Haynes. In that moment he was just a stranger, with a job to do a job he wanted us to believe he had. He stopped dead center at the river's gate, didn't knock, didn't clear his throat. Just called out to Hannah like an officer calling roll. "Ma'am, you're in violation. Shrubs out of compliance. You've got 24 hours. Hannah straightened, wiped a petal from her wrist, and answered in that calm way of hers. "Everything's within the guidelines. I checked. If you have an official notice, you can leave it with me, and I'll review." It was reasonable, polite, the kind of answer that should have sent him on his way. Trevor didn't budge. He stepped closer, shoes on the edge of the flower bed. "This isn't a debate," he said, tapping the clipboard. 24 hours or you'll be fined. I heard a bike skid behind me. Two boys stopped at the curb watching. Mrs. Reynolds turned off her hose but didn't move, as if stillness could make her invisible. Even the radio down the block seemed to quiet. Hannah put down her clippers. "Sir, I'm asking you to step off my plants," she said, firm now. "If there's a letter, I'll take it. Otherwise, you need to leave." He tilted his head, a little smile that didn't reach his eyes. The air tightened around us. I should have said something. I should have done something besides stand there and hold my breath. Trevor moved first. It was fast, too fast for the mind to prepare for it. Too fast for the body to believe it. His arms snapped, palm arcing, and the sound. It cracked through the heat like a board breaking. Hannah's head turned with it. She took a step back, hand to her cheek, more shocked than hurt at first, like the world had slipped, and she couldn't find her footing. The hose slipped from Mrs. Reynolds' hands and slapped the grass water fan, spraying her ankles. One of the boys whispered, "Oh my God," voice thin and high. The radio cut completely, as if whoever was listening had reached over and killed it mid-song. I didn't see Marcus until he was there. He came out of the front door like a shadow, solidifying. No shout, no scramble, just presence. Tall shoulders brought a calm that wasn't calm at all. You could feel the temperature of the street change with him standing on that porch. He looked at Hannah's face first, tracked the red print blooming across her cheek, and then his eyes found Trevor. I've seen men glare. I've seen men posture. This wasn't that. This was colder, quieter, like when a storm goes silent right before it hits. "Did you just hit my wife?" Marcus asked, voice low enough that I felt it more than heard it. Trevor tried swagger, the cheap kind. He rolled his shoulders, lifted the clipboard like it meant something. "She's in violation," he said loud enough for us to hear. "Someone's gotta enforce the rules." A couple of phones were up now, hands shaking. You could hear screens unlocking, the digital chirps of recording apps starting. Someone farther down the block muttered a prayer. We all knew we were watching a line being drawn on our street, and none of us knew what crossing it would cost. Hannah touched Marcus's sleeve, a small anchor. "Marcus," she said, steady, but tight, I'm okay. It wasn't a plea to stop. It was a plea to be careful. I could see it in the set of her jaw. She knew what he was capable of, and she knew what it might do to him to use it here on a lawn with roses and children and a neighbor's hose still hissing over the grass. Trevor took that touch the wrong way. He mistook gentleness for weakness. He laughed a short, ugly sound and stepped closer to scuffing the dirt. "You people don't get it," he said. "We run this neighborhood now." A car rolled past the far corner and kept going slow as a thought. The boys on the bikes didn't move. No one moved. Marcus came off the porch. Not a stomp, not a charge. Just 3 even steps that closed the space between 2 kinds of men. "You think this is enforcement?" he asked. His hand flicked toward Hannah without looking away from Trevor. Trevor squared up like he wanted to prove something. Later, I'd replay the next seconds a dozen times trying to catch the beat where choice lived. If he'd stepped back, if he'd swallowed his pride. But the truth is simple, he didn't. Pride is a sharp thing in a fool's hand. Hannah breathed in a small inhale that sounded loud in that silence. Marcus's shoulders settled. Everything in him seemed to focus like a camera lens turning to clarity. There was no show in it, no extra motion. If you blinked, you might have missed the way the street itself seemed to lean forward. From somewhere behind us came the faintest wail sirens, distant, threading the heat like a warning arriving late. A window shade lifted on the 2nd floor across the street. It felt like the whole block had eyes. Trevor's jaw worked. He started to say something, another threat, another empty badge of authority. He didn't finish. Not yet. Not here. I can tell you what it felt like, though. It felt like the first drop before the rain thunders down. It felt like the moment a dog stops barking and just watches. It felt like standing too close to a live wire and knowing one wrong breath could set the world on fire. People will ask why no one stepped in, why no one put a hand out between them. I've asked myself that more than once. But there are scenes you arrive at too late to rewrite. There are seconds that belong to the people in them, to the vows they made, and the lines already crossed. Hannah lowered her hand from her cheek. Her mouth had a brave line to it now. Marcus lifted his chin a fraction, eyes never leaving Trevor's. And on a summer afternoon in a neighborhood that thought it knew itself, you could feel the quiet crack, the kind of break you don't patch with a polite apology and a letter to the board. I wish I could tell you the slap was the worst of it. I wish I could say the man realized what he'd done and backed away, that the uniforms were real, that the clipboard held something besides bluster. But the truth is, a stranger walked onto a lawn and struck a woman in broad daylight. And the man who loved her stepped forward to claim the space where fear thought it had the deed. That's how it began, right there between the roses and the curb, between a promise to keep the peace and a promise to defend it. And if you were standing where I was, hose at your feet, mouth gone dry, you'd have known exactly what I knew. Then the quiet was over. The storm had found our street. I swear I could hear the street hold its breath when Marcus said it. "Did you just hit my wife?" Like the words themselves pressed a finger to every mouth on Cedar Creek. He didn't shout. He didn't puff up. He said it the way a judge bangs a gavel, simple, final, no room for misunderstanding. Trevor's smile twitched, that cocky little curl that looks brave until you're close enough to smell the fear hiding underneath. Then he gave a signal, 2 fingers, small as a blink. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement. 2 men peeled off the sidewalk like they'd been waiting for their cue. Polo shirts, the same fake HOA badge, stitched 2 proud nylon belts, dressed up to look official. One was thick through the chest buzz, cut the kind of guy who counts reps out loud at the gym. The other was wiry with a nervous jaw, baton clipped at his hip like a toy he was afraid to play with. Later we learned their names, Darrell Brooks and Colt Harris, but in that moment they were just the answer to Trevor's arrogance numbers. Darrell flashed a grin at Marcus like he'd already won. Colt rolled his shoulders, trying to fit into a uniform that wasn't his. You could feel their math from the sidewalk, 3-on-1. A veteran, or not 3-on-1, is supposed to bend the odds. Marcus didn't do math. He measured distance. I've seen fights, bar dust-ups, high school scuffles, the kind where people throw big arms and hope to land on pride. This wasn't that. Marcus slid a half-step left, turned his shoulders, and the space changed, like he took our tame little front lawns and quietly redrew the map. Trevor's clipboard rose pointless as a paper shield. Marcus's hand found Trevor's wrist. It was so clean I almost missed it. No wind-up, no show. Wrist twist fold. The sound that followed was small but honest. A wet pop of a joint not built for that angle. Trevor bent the way the wrist told him to, bend half-dropping, half-dragged knees buckling into the grass. His breath came out through his teeth in a hiss he couldn't swallow back. Daryl charged, leading with his ego. Marcus pivoted. I saw heel to turf, a hip turn, and then the heel of Marcus's foot thudded into Daryl's sternum, like a door being kicked shut from the inside. The big man's back hit the lawn with a puff of clippings, eyes wide arms, doing that useless grab the air thing people do when all the air just left them. Colt's baton finally remembered what it was there for. He yanked it free with a shaky little flourish and swung high the way a movie tells you to, which is another way of saying wrong. Marcus dipped under the arc, slid inside it, and hooked Colt's elbow with one hand, while his other arm cut across the neck. A quick step, a tight turn, the ground arrived faster than Colt's brain, and his baton bounced once on the sidewalk before rolling into the rosebed like it wanted cover. It was quiet again, but a different quiet. The kind you get in a church right after the hymn ends, right before the prayer. Phones were up all around me, little red recording lights winking like the street had grown a necklace of fireflies. Mrs. Reynolds' hose still hissed. Someone whispered, "Lord have mercy." I couldn't tell if they meant it for Marcus, for Trevor, or for all of us. Marcus never looked at us. He kept his body between Hannah and the three men, like he was a door that could lock itself. Trevor tried to thrash his way upright, but Marcus kept his wrist folded, with a pressure that made the lessons sink deeper. "Stop," Marcus said low, like a warning you get once. For a heartbeat, Trevor obeyed. Then the old swagger twitched through him. "You're finished," he spat, trying to turn his head enough to find our eyes. "You hear me?" We run. Marcus sank his weight, and Trevor's mouth snapped shut on a grunt. He couldn't dress up as anything else. Daryl finally rolled to his side, claws in the grass, sucking at the heat like he could inhale strength out of the afternoon. He made it to his knees, found the shape of Colt on the lawn beside him, and for a second, just a second, his bravado slid. Not much, not a confession, but the kind of flicker you recognize if you've ever watched a man reconsider the story he tells himself about what kind of man he is. "Stay down," Marcus said without turning. It wasn't a threat, it was advice. I caught Hannah's face then, cheek bright, with a slap's angry echo, eyes clear. She wasn't hiding behind Marcus. She was right beside him, one hand on the edge of the porch rail, breathing steady like she'd found the place in herself where fear sits down and keeps quiet so courage can speak. Trevor tried a new tactic. Volume. "You can't touch me," he barked, the words breaking where the pain bent them. "I'm with no one," Marcus said, cutting him clean. He leaned in just enough, and his voice dropped to that dangerous calm that doesn't travel far because it doesn't have to. "Touch her again," he said, "and you'll never walk free." It wasn't movie tough talk. It didn't bounce off the houses. It just landed heavy right where it needed to land, inside the skull of a man who'd mistaken a porch for a stage. Colt groaned from the grass fingers, searching for his baton, like a kid reaching under a bed for a monster he's not sure he wants to find. Daryl made it to standing wobbly, one hand pressed to his chest as if he could hold his ribs in place by will alone. He glanced at Trevor, at Marcus, at the phones. You could see him doing a different kind of math now. A breeze came through then, honest and ordinary, moving heat off our skin. The scent of cut grass gave way to something else, metal and sweat, the sharpness of roses bruised by a fallen baton. Far off, a siren lifted its thin voice into the open, and then another harmony threading through the maple leaves. The sound grew as if someone was pulling it down the block on a rope. Neighbors edged closer, but not too close. The boys with the bikes put their feet down tires, squeaking. A second-story window creaked open across the way. Even the dog that never shuts up at the corner house went quiet, ears pricked, head cocked, like he knew this wasn't his part to play. Trevor swallowed something that wasn't pride. He tried one last squirm and found the same answer waiting for him, bone-leverage consequence. Marcus held him like a craftsman holds a tool, no anger, no waste, just purpose. I realized then what had been punching through my chest since Marcus took that first step off the porch. This wasn't a fight. Fights are messy and loud. This was correction. A line had been crossed in sunlight in front of children and flowers, and the polite fiction of a fake badge and a man who knew how to draw lines had put one back where it belonged. The sirens grew brighter, yes, brighter, because sound can do that when it carries authority, and the intersection at the end of the block flashed blue and red, like a storm rolling in with its own lightning. Somebody whispered, "They're coming," as if the sentence might change the timeline. Trevor finally went still, not from wisdom, but from arithmetic. Pain plus eyes plus consequences equals quiet. Darrell lowered his gaze. Colt found his baton, stared at it, and left it where it lay. Marcus looked at none of it. He kept his eyes on the man who had raised a hand to his wife and held steady until help arrived. And we stood there with him, all of us, in that hell-breath moment between what had happened and what would happen next. Phones recording, hearts racing, a neighborhood learning in real time what it means when someone says, "Not here." The cruiser slid into view a heartbeat later, sirens stepping down as the lights kept pulsing. And just like that, the street exhaled only to pull in a new breath for whatever the next chapter was about to write. I remember how it all started long before that slap about 3 months earlier, when Marcus and Hannah first unpacked their lives on Cedar Creek. They came for quiet, the kind you can almost taste in the air. After 20 years of deployments and midnight calls, Marcus wanted mornings without alarms and nights that belonged only to the sound of wind in the trees. Hannah wanted a garden big enough for roses, the sort that bloom heavy and fragrant. They didn't move here to hide. They moved here to breathe. For a while, Cedar Creek kept its promise. Every morning I'd see Marcus running the lake trail, steady as the sunrise, nodding hello to dog walkers and cyclists. Hannah turned their yard into a postcard, lavender edging the walkway, roses climbing a trellis she painted herself. Neighbors waved from porches, swapped pie recipes, and asked for pruning tips. It felt like the neighborhood we all brag about when family calls, from out of state, safe neighborly, the kind of place where kids play tag till the streetlights blink on. A quiet paradise, the one we all thought would stay that way. But storms start quiet. The first hint was small enough to ignore a stranger on the sidewalk taking pictures of mailboxes. At first I assumed he was with the Real Homeowners Association, maybe checking addresses for a newsletter. Then there were 3 of them, all wearing identical dark polos stitched with an HOA emblem that looked just a shade too new, the edges of the patch not quite sitting right. They carried clipboards and tape measures, but no one ever saw a city badge or a letter of authorization. They'd appear in pairs, stroll across lawns without knocking, and vanish just as quickly. One Sunday morning, I caught sight of Marcus watching them from his driveway, arms crossed. Later, Hannah told me that same week she'd been stopped on her walk to the mailbox. Trevor Haynes, though she didn't know his name, then stepped right in front of her path. His voice was flat and cold. "Your mailbox paint is peeling. Violation. You have 10 days to fix it or pay a fine." Hannah asked to see a written notice. Trevor tilted his head, eyes narrowing like she'd missed the point. "We don't waste paper," he said. "We keep order in our own way. No badge, no paperwork." Just a smile that felt more like a dare. When Marcus heard about it, he asked for proof, an email, a letterhead, anything. Trevor only smirked and repeated that strange phrase, "We have our way of keeping things in order." It wasn't just arrogance, it was a threat dressed as authority. The kind of sentence that sticks in your ear long after the voice is gone. Words spread fast like heat on a dry fence. Margaret Lee, who'd lived here 20 years, whispered to me that she'd already paid $50 to avoid trouble over a so-called curtain violation. Tom Alvarez, retired school teacher, admitted he'd handed over cash when they told him his hedges were too high. Families started closing blinds earlier, skipping evening walks hoping to stay invisible. Children stayed closer to home. A neighborhood built on easy smiles began to carry itself like a room full of people waiting for a knock they didn't want to hear. Marcus saw it differently. To him, it wasn't just bullying. It smelled like a structured operation. In the service, he'd learned to read small signs, a mismatched uniform button, a phrase that didn't fit. He recognized the pattern of predators who hide behind a badge, real or fake. Every instinct from years of reconnaissance told him this was organized crime wearing a friendly polo. I remember one evening on my porch watching him jog past without his usual wave. He slowed, scanning the street the way soldiers do in unfamiliar territory. Later, Hannah confided that he'd started double-checking door locks, noting unfamiliar cars, memorizing faces. Not fear, preparation. Like a man drawing a mental map of a battlefield he hoped he wouldn't need, but knew he might. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. The quick disappearances, the identical uniforms that never aged, the way Trevor and his crew seemed to know exactly which houses to target widows, retirees, young families still settling in. They weren't random, they were hunting. And we, wanting so badly to keep our quiet, were letting them. By the time the slap came, Marcus had already chosen a side inside himself. Not to start a fight, but to stand ready when one arrived. The rest of us were still hoping politeness might hold the line. We mistook our silence for peace, never realizing it was only feeding the storm that was about to break. I remember the night our street finally admitted what it had been hiding. The air was warm and still cicadas buzzing like faint electricity in the trees. Yet Margaret Lee's voice shook as she spoke. 70 years old and usually quick with a sharp-witted joke, she clutched her cane as if it might steady her heart. They told me to change my curtains in 10 days or pay $100, she said. When I asked why, one of them leaned in so close I could smell his breath and said, "Don't make us come back." The way she whispered "come back" made the porch lights around us feel colder. I'd known Margaret for years, she never exaggerated. That night she looked small and tired, as if she'd been carrying this weight for weeks without daring to tell a soul. On the next porch, Tom Alvarez shifted on his swing. A retired school teacher who used to lead our 4th of July cookouts, he cleared his throat and confessed I paid them $50. Said my hedge was too tall. I knew it was nonsense, but I just wanted peace. The word peace sounded like defeat. His eyes stayed on the floorboards as if meeting ours might break something fragile inside him. Across the street, the Chen family didn't even come outside. Their curtains stayed drawn, lights low. For weeks, Trevor and his crew had circled their yard with clipboards, snapping pictures and writing in secret. The Chens skipped their evening walks. Their little girl stopped riding her scooter after sunset. Mrs. Chen told me later it felt like being stalked by a shadow that never quite showed its face. As these stories spilled out, a pattern emerged like pieces of a cruel puzzle snapping together. Doors that once stayed open till bedtime now closed at dinner. Porch lights burned through the night like tiny warning flares. Conversations fell to whispers whenever a dark SUV rolled by. Cedar Creek, once known for easy smiles and borrowed sugar, began to hold its breath. I'd felt it too. Neighbors stopped waving. Children played closer to their porches. What we told ourselves was keeping safe was really just shrinking, giving Trevor and his imposters the space to grow bolder. Marcus saw it clearer than anyone. One evening, standing by his mailbox with Hannah beside him, he spoke just loud enough to reach the houses around. If we stay quiet, he said, voice steady but heavy, we're helping them. Silence is exactly what they need. He wasn't angry. He was resolute, a man who had read this playbook before and knew where it led. Hannah rested a hand on his arm, a quiet sign of support, but the determination in her eyes matched his. She had seen the nights when Marcus paced the windows and checked the locks twice. This wasn't fear for fear's sake. It was a soldier's understanding that a threat ignored is a threat invited. Not everyone welcomed his words. From farther down the block, a man called out, "Don't stir things up, Marcus. If we leave them alone, maybe they'll leave us alone." A couple of others nodded quickly, as if agreement might buy them protection. Some just looked away. In that instant, a silent border formed between those willing to stand together and those hoping to vanish into the dark. It's hard to blame them. Fear can sound reasonable. It tells you to pay $50 rather than risk a midnight knock. It whispers that the footsteps outside are just the wind. Each time someone obeyed that whisper, Trevor's power grew. That was the heart of it. Trevor and his partners didn't need weapons. The fear we handed them was sharper than any blade. Every unreported threat, every quiet payment, every closed curtain became another brick in the wall that let them patrol our sidewalks like kings. Looking back, I see that this was the most dangerous part. They weren't just controlling lawns, they were colonizing our minds. By turning good neighbors into silent witnesses, they won ground without a single visible battle. And until someone broke that silence, they were winning. As the night deepened, porch lights glowed like uneasy lanterns. Somewhere beyond the houses, a lone car slowed and then rolled on tires, whispering against the pavement. Marcus stood with Hannah at their gate, eyes scanning the dark. A faint rustle came from the hedges across the street, Maybe a raccoon, maybe not. He didn't move, but I saw the way his shoulders set, the way a man sets when he senses a line about to be crossed. Walking home under that watchful quiet, I realized we were close to losing more than money or sleep. We were losing each other. And the only person I'd seen refuse that bargain was Marcus Rivers, standing guard with the steadiness of someone who knew a storm was coming and would not let fear have the final word. Nights changed first. Cedar Creek used to exhale after sunset, screen doors, clicking sprinklers, hissing a dog, grumbling at the moon. Then came the sounds you notice only when you're listening for them, a single step on gravel, a twig giving up under a shoe, the hush that follows a held breath. Marcus heard it more than once. He'd snap on the porch light and catch nothing but a sway of leaves and a scuff of tread in the dust by the gate. In the morning, faint shoe prints traced half circles along his fence, like someone had paced there considering. Daylight didn't help. Trevor and his crew learned the choreography of intimidation. They'd arrive in pairs tape measures, dangling phones out, pretending to log violations. They'd squat by a mailbox photograph, a gutter hold a blade of grass between two fingers, like judges at a contest nobody entered. Sometimes they didn't do anything at all. They'd just stand 20 feet from the river's steps, hands on hips, eyes flat, letting the minutes pile up into a message: we're here because we can be. You feel that kind of pressure in your body long before your mind admits it. Kids stopped riding past Hannah's roses. Porch conversations shortened to throat clears and nods. Even the morning joggers ran with headphones off, listening. We weren't living. We were bracing. One morning, the bracing broke. I was taking out the trash when I heard voices sharpen across the street. Trevor had the Chens pinned at the edge of their lawn clipboard, tilted like a badge. Non-compliant shrubbery, he said, too loud for just them. Third notice, Mr. Chen tried for polite. We haven't received any letters. If you'll provide, Trevor stepped in, closing the space the way a man closes a door. Don't play dumb. Marcus crossed the street without rushing, which somehow made it feel faster. He put himself between Trevor and the Chens as naturally as stepping into shade. If there's an issue, he said, voice level, you bring it to me. You don't corner families on their own grass. Trevor smiled the way men smile when they think a crowd makes them taller. He leaned in so close I could see the pulse in his temple. Wait until your wife breaks a rule, he murmured. Then we'll see who decides what happens on this street. There are sentences that sound like smoke alarms to the right ears. Marcus didn't flinch. He only shifted his stance, a subtle recalibration, as if his bones moved into a familiar pattern. Step back, he said. Trevor didn't. He misread composure as surrender and authority as appetite. Darrell flanked left. Colt hung back, eyes flicking from fence to sidewalk, like he was looking for exits he'd claim later were entrances. The Chens retreated, grateful for distance. I felt my own feet fixed to the concrete. A couple of neighbors paused mid-walk and pretended to check their phones. Nobody wanted to be the next story told on a porch at night. From then on, the air had weight. Afternoons stretched thin like heat pulling taffy. By dusk, doors latched early. Windows cracked, for breeze were shut at the first hint of dark. Parents called their kids in sooner with voices that tried and failed to sound casual. We'd traded ease for vigilance, and it showed in the way shoulders lived closer to ears. Hannah wore that strain differently. She kept moving, watering, pruning, straightening the welcome mat that suddenly felt like a dare. But I saw the way she startled at small noises, a delivery truck's tailgate, a basketball hitting pavement. She started a journal, the kind with thick paper that absorbs ink like a secret. I caught a glimpse one evening, short entries in tidy lines. 11:07 p.m. footsteps near East Fence. 2:13 a.m. car idled, then left. Don't let them shrink the light. Courage set down in ink is still courage, but courage costs. Some nights she and Marcus stood by the front window without speaking. He'd track a shadow between street lamps. She'd listen for that telltale grind of gravel. When the silence lifted, he'd tell her a story from another life. How the worst ambushes never announced themselves. How the body learned to read a pause as clearly as a shout. This feels the same, he said once. Pressure first, then the push. And that's what it was, a slow, deliberate narrowing. The fake uniforms, the staged inspections, the quiet pacing after midnight. Each piece small enough to dismiss on its own together, forming a pattern that pointed in one direction: collision. We like to think explosions come from sparks, but sometimes they're born from weight. Cedar Creek was getting heavier by the day. You could hear it in the hush after a car door closed, see it in the way neighbors traded eye contact for a quick nod. We were a street full of people doing the math of avoidance and coming up short. The night before everything broke, a breeze carried the smell of cut grass and something metallic I couldn't name. A shape paused in the shadow beyond the river's hedge. Porch light washed over nothing. Still, the hair on my arms lifted like it knew. If a story can draw breath, ours did then, slow, shallow waiting. Looking back, all the signs were there. Not omens, exactly, just facts arranged in a line you could follow with your finger. Footsteps where there shouldn't be footsteps. Eyes where there shouldn't be witnesses. A promise unspoken but clear tomorrow would ask for an answer. The afternoon didn't feel wrong at first. It was the kind of late daylight Cedar Creek does best, soft, warm, everything touched with a little gold. Hannah was out front in her wide-brimmed hat, trimming the roses like she always did when the sun slid lower. I was rolling my trash can back beside the garage. Ordinary sounds carried easy, a basketball drumming 2 streets over a lawnmower, coughing once and quitting when, finding the chimes on Mrs. Reynolds's porch. If you didn't know better, you'd have sworn the street was safe. But Hannah kept glancing toward the sidewalk between snips like she was listening for something only she could hear. The hat shadowed her face, but I saw the way her shoulders worked, steady hands, tight jaw. The kind of calm that doesn't come from ease, but from choosing it anyway. They appeared the way trouble often does from more than one place at once. Trevor came up the main walk straight as a ruler, clipboard tucked under his arm like a badge he'd been born to wear. Daryl drifted in from the left, cutting through Mrs. Park's grass as if property lines were rumors. Colt slid along the curb from the right, eyes darting, baton clipped, and too visible the way a child shows off a toy he's not supposed to have. 3 points, 1 circle closing. Afternoon, Trevor said, which somehow made the word unfriendly. His smile wasn't a smile at all. We've got outstanding violations. Let's make this simple. Hannah didn't back up. She set her clippers on the brick edging and straightened. You're not here to make anything simple, she said. Her voice was steady enough to quiet the chimes. You're just bullies in polo shirts. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sentence landed like a stone dropped in still water, clean, undeniable, sending rings outward. Trevor's cheek ticked. He took one more step, his shoe nudging into the flower bed like that too was a violation he intended to write. For half a second I thought maybe he'd talk, that he'd try to drown her in official words. Instead, his hand moved. You don't think a palm can sound like that, but it can. It cracked across Hannah's face with a sting that seemed to slap the whole street. The air snapped tight and then went dead. The basketball silenced. The mower gave up. The wind took a breath and kept it. Hannah flinched and caught herself, one hand rising to her cheek. Eyes wide, not with tears, but with a pure, clean anger that looked like clarity. Phones came up like reflexes. A boy on a bike put both feet on the ground and forgot to breathe. Mrs. Reynolds's watering can tipped, pouring a silver sheet into the dirt. I didn't see Marcus at the door. He was just suddenly there, stepping off the porch, as if he'd been standing in that doorway for this exact moment. No shout, no rush. He moved like a decision already made. He cut the distance in 3 even strides and put himself between Hannah and the men. For a sliver of time, it looked like nothing more than a husband reaching his wife, a simple act you could photograph and frame. Then the moment changed shape. Did you just hit my wife? He asked Trevor. Not a threat, not a plea, a fact checking another fact. Trevor tried on his swagger again, but it didn't fit as well this close. He opened his mouth to talk and Marcus moved first. I've seen scrapes in parking lots. I've seen good men throw bad punches. What Marcus did wasn't a fight. It was geometry. His hand found Trevor's wrist like it had been there before. Twist fold. Trevor's body obeyed the angle. It had to. His knees found the grass. The clipboard skittered, absurd and useless. Daryl lunged, leading with his chest like he meant to bull through the air itself. Marcus turned a hip, planted, and drove the ball of his foot straight into Daryl's sternum. The sound wasn't cinematic. It was a thud you felt in your own ribs. A door slammed from the inside. Daryl's breath quit him. He sat down hard on the lawn with an expression that said the world had lied about gravity. Colt pulled the baton. He telegraphed the swing the way movies teach you to, wide and high and full of noise. Marcus slipped under it, stepped inside the arc, trapped the elbow with one hand, and cut his forearm across Colt's neck with the other. A step a turn, and Colt's feet left the script. He hit the grass shoulders first, the baton bouncing into the rosebed and vanishing in red. The neighborhood exhaled in a single ragged sound. Shouts, gasps, a child's thin mom, and the metallic chirp of a phone starting to record. I realized I'd moved closer, without meaning to trash can forgotten halfway up the drive. Across the street, a blind lifted. A dog that always barked didn't. Trevor tried to rise on fury alone. Marcus kept the wrist hooked and turned just enough to say stop without saying it. Don't, he told him, and the word was a wall. Daryl rolled onto his hands and knees and stayed there, his mouth working for air, like he'd misplaced it. Colt blinked up at the sky, surprised to find it still there. Hannah stood to Marcus's right now, hands at her sides, breath measured, the red print on her cheek standing out like a flag she refused to lower. Trevor found his voice again, jagged at the edges. You can't, he started. With no badge, no right, and no shame, Marcus said, eyes steady. Watch me. For a heartbeat, none of us belong to ourselves. We belong to the moment the camera lights the grass crushed under knees, the way a street turns into a stage when justice and arrogance meet without a script. Marcus leaned down until his mouth was near Trevor's ear. His voice traveled only as far as it needed to. Touch her again, he said, slow, each word set where it would hold, and you'll never walk free. It didn't sound like a line. It sounded like a promise a person makes to himself and lets another man overhear. Somewhere down the block, a siren lifted and wound toward us. Then another harmonizing. The color got to us before the cruisers did, blue and red, washing across eaves and windshields, turning the roses briefly purple. The sound grew the way a verdict grows inevitable and close. Daryl managed to stand, one hand pressed to his chest like he could hold the ache in. He looked at Trevor the way men look at a fire they helped start. Colt found his baton in the flowers and didn't pick it up. He stared at it like it might accuse him if he touched it again. A few neighbors edged forward, not brave exactly, just tired of being small. A woman cupped Hannah's elbow for a second and stepped back, her own phone still recording. The boys on bikes rolled their front tires back and forth, not daring to leave, not daring to get closer. Trevor spat a curse and tried to twist free. Pain and leverage had a different answer waiting. Marcus didn't punish it. He corrected it. He held the line steady the way a carpenter holds a level and waits for the bubble to settle where it should have been all along. Marcus, Hannah said quietly, and though she wasn't asking him to stop, she was reminding him where he was, on a lawn with roses in front of eyes under a sky that would remember. He nodded once without looking away from Trevor. It wasn't rage in him. It was resolve. It was the simple refusal to let a lie stand on its feet next to the woman he loved. The cruiser slid into view, then lights, strobing sirens stepping down to a bark. Doors cracked open, voices low and practiced. Moved closer, hands hovered near holsters but didn't hurry. The officers took in the picture like men reading a paragraph in a language they knew by heart, a wrist held at an angle that said, "Control 2 winded accomplices," a woman with a fresh red mark on her cheek, a street full of witnesses who had finally decided to be more than scenery. Before anyone spoke official words, the neighborhood found one more breath together. We had been living in a quiet that wasn't peace. Now the noise that mattered had arrived. And as blue and red danced across the river's windows, I felt something loosen inside my chest. Not relief, not yet, but the sense that the next chapter would be written in ink we could all see. The street was still trembling from the fight when the first cruiser swung in, fast tires squealing against the curb. Blue and red washed over every house, over the crushed grass where Trevor lay, and the roses that still quivered from Marcus's last move. A second cruiser followed, braking hard. Doors opened in one practiced motion. Officer Ramirez, broad-shouldered and steady-eyed, stepped out, first hand resting on his holster. Beside him came Detective Anderson, older, with the slow, assessing look of a man who's seen too many late-night calls turn ugly. Their flashlights cut through the dusk as they moved up the driveway. I could feel the air shift, part relief, part new tension, as their boots clicked across the pavement. What they saw needed no translation. Trevor was face down, breathing in sharp, shallow bursts, his arm pinned at an unnatural angle beneath Marcus's knee. Daryl Brooks knelt in the grass, one arm wrapped around his ribs. Colt Harris sat hunched, a scrape on his cheek, and his baton forgotten in the flower bed. And there was Marcus Rivers, tall and still one hand on Hannah's shoulder, as if anchoring them both. Around them gathered half the neighborhood phones, raised screens, glowing whispers humming like an electric fence. Ramirez's gaze moved from the bruised men to Marcus and back again. "What happened here?" he asked, voice calm, but edged with command. Before Marcus could speak, a chorus broke out. Mrs. Reynolds pointed her hose like a witness stand. Tom Alvarez raised his phone high. Margaret Lee's voice cracked but fierce carried across the yard. "They're not HOA," she shouted. "They've been scamming us for months, threats, fake fines. We've been terrified." Others piled on, neighbors who had paid neighbors who had stayed silent until now. Each confession tumbled into the warm evening like stones finally dropped. Detective Anderson listened without hurry, his pen scratching across a small notebook. Then he tapped at a tablet pulled from his coat fingers, moving with the confidence of long habit. The quiet between sirens filled with the soft clicks of a database opening doors. A minute later, he looked up, jaw tightening. "Trevor Haynes," he said, voice low enough to quiet the crowd. "Multiple priors, fraud, extortion, assault. Several states. And a pattern impersonating HOA security to shake down residents." Gasps scattered through the group. I heard someone mutter, "All this time." Another neighbor swore softly under his breath. The image of a petty neighborhood bully vanished, replaced by something colder and far more deliberate. Ramirez turned back to Marcus. "Mr. Rivers," he said evenly, "did you strike first?" Marcus kept his eyes level. "No. He hit my wife. I stopped him. And when the others rushed, I defended us." His voice carried the weight of a man who has given testimony before and never once needed to rehearse the truth. Ramirez studied him for a beat, then nodded. "With what I'm seeing and with these witnesses, you're not the one in trouble here." The tension in the crowd loosened just a notch. Hannah exhaled so quietly it was almost a sigh. A few phones lowered, though none were turned off. Detective Anderson, however, wasn't finished. He slid the tablet back into his coat and looked over the gathering with something heavier than relief. "Understand this," he said, his tone suddenly like a hammer on iron. "This crew is just the surface. In cases like this, there's often someone higher, someone selling the uniforms, pulling the strings, feeding addresses. We'll be digging deeper." The words landed like a second siren. A few neighbors shifted uneasily, glancing toward the dark end of the street, as if expecting more shadows to emerge. For months we had thought we were dealing with a few overzealous grifters. Now it sounded like a pipeline of organized theft running through quiet suburbs like ours. Ramirez and Anderson moved with quiet efficiency after that reading. Trevor, his rights cuffing, Darrell and Colt logging evidence, with the patience of men who know every detail will matter later. Cameras kept flashing. Children whispered to parents. You could feel the neighborhood recalibrating in real time, from fear to shock to the uneasy recognition that we had all been part of something larger than we guessed. As the cruiser's back doors shut with a hard finality, Cedar Creek stood in a rare kind of silence. Not the old silence of polite evenings, but the breathless pause after a storm when the damage is visible, and the next question hangs in the air. If these three were only the beginning, who else had been watching us all along? We gathered that same evening in the Chin's living room, a space that usually smelled like jasmine tea and fresh laundry. Shoes piled by the door, folding chairs scraped across hardwood, and the hum of a box fan pushed the warm air in slow circles. Nobody came to socialize. We came because the quiet had run out. You could feel it, a tightness, a shame, even like we were all waking up to how long we'd let fear pick our locks. Mr. Chen stood by the TV, fingers laced. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice steady but thin. Mrs. Chen passed a tray of paper cups like a reflex, her smile apologetic, not cheerful. People we'd known for years sat closer than usual, Margaret with her cane resting across her knees, Tom Alvarez leaning forward, elbows on thighs. Mrs. Reynolds still in her gardening hat, as if she'd run out the door. The room was packed enough that some of us pressed against the hall walls, craning to see. Marcus stepped to the front without ceremony. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "What happened today isn't a one-off," he said. "They count on two things, fear and silence. If we stay afraid and we stay quiet, they win. If we stand together, they don't." He let that sit, no theatrics, just a truth he set down like a tool on a workbench. "Look," he went on, "I'm not here to make anyone a soldier I don't want a street full of heroes. I want neighbors, but neighbors who answer the door when trouble knocks together." He stepped back, and Hannah stood up beside him. I saw her touch the faint mark still warming her cheek, not hiding it, not displaying it either, acknowledging. When he slapped me, she said, her voice soft but clear, he wanted me to feel small. And I did for a second. Then I looked up and saw my husband, and I saw some of you on your porches. And I remembered small is what we become when we stand alone. I don't want to be alone anymore. I don't want any of us to be. The room breathed in, out. A floorboard popped somewhere down the hall. It felt like the house itself was listening. Tom Alvarez raised his hand, not because he had to, but because he's the kind of man who does. "Marcus," he said with respect, "most of us aren't trained. We're teachers, retirees, parents. What if this happens again? What if they send more?" He glanced toward the window where the streetlights threw the suggestion of branches against the glass. "What if standing up makes it worse?" Marcus nodded like he'd expected the question and was grateful to hear it out loud. "Training helps, sure," he said. "But it isn't the point. Strength isn't one strong person. It's 30 ordinary people standing shoulder to shoulder. If 30 of us had been out there this afternoon, Trevor never would have raised a hand. Predators isolate. Community denies them that." Mrs. Park spoke from the back voice, shaking at first and then finding itself. "So what does standing together look like?" she asked. "Something real, not just bravery." Heads pivoted to Marcus, then to Hannah, then back to the front door, as if expecting the answer to walk in. "Real looks like this," Marcus said, ticking items off on his fingers. "First, a shared contact list, phone numbers and emails for every house on this street. Second, a rapid alert chain. When something happens, one text becomes 10 becomes 30. Third, porch light protocol. If someone's being hassled, front lights on up and down the block, visible solidarity. Fourth, camera coverage. If you don't have one, we help you set one up. Fifth, documentation. No cash, no compliance without paper. We record, we report, we don't negotiate on our lawns." A murmur of agreement moved through the room like wind lifting a curtain. People started nodding, small at first, then bigger. Margaret tapped her cane once on the floor. "Put me on the list," she said. "If my light's on, it's on for you too." Tom exhaled. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I can do that." He looked less like a man apologizing to the word peace and more like a man redefining it. Mrs. Reynolds raised her phone. "I've got a neighborhood email from the last block party," she offered. "Let's start with that and fill in the gaps." Mrs. Chen fetched a notepad and began collecting numbers, her handwriting quick and neat. The room warmed not from air, but from decision. That's when Detective Anderson stepped through the doorway. Ramirez waited outside with another officer, their voices a low threat on the porch. Anderson removed his hat because he's the sort who does even in a cramped living room. "Didn't mean to interrupt," he said, "but I want you to hear this from me, not a rumor." He held up a folder, slim but heavy with implication. "We're not treating this like a simple assault," he said. "Mr. Haynes and his associates fit a pattern we've seen in other counties, coordinated impersonation and extortion. We're working with neighboring jurisdictions. We'll be patient and we'll be thorough." A hand went up in the corner. "Do they get out?" someone asked. On bail, Anderson didn't flinch. Possibly, probably. But that isn't the end of the story. It's a chapter. Here's what matters tonight. Keep doing what you're doing. Document everything. Call us before you engage. And know this. He glanced around the room, meeting eyes. You're not alone anymore. Silence, the good kind, followed. Then chairs creaked as people shifted forward toward the paper Mrs. Chen was passing toward one another. Phones were out not to record fear this time, but to enter numbers. Names overlapped across the page like a map of who we actually were when we remembered. Hannah found my eye and gave a small nod, the sort that says thank you without saying for what. Mr. Chen's daughter brought out a plate of cookies no one had planned to eat, and they suddenly made sense, something to pass while you build a thing together. We drafted the first alert text, if you see suspicious activity, reply, all with address and lights. We agreed on simple signals. 2 porch lights flicked twice for immediate eyes, a continuous Ring camera feed pushed to a shared folder. A call to 911 as step 1, not afterthought. The plan wasn't glamorous. It was better usable. By the time the room began to thin, the air had changed. The shame that had walked in with us was lighter traded for the weight of a promise. Out on the sidewalk, I saw 3 porch lights click on in quick succession, then a fourth, then mine. The street didn't look brave. It looked awake. As we filtered out into the night, Detective Anderson paused by the door. "We'll widen the circle," he said quietly. "We'll find who's feeding these guys uniforms and addresses. It may take time, but we'll keep at it." He tipped his head, then joined Ramirez on the porch. I stepped into the warm dark and listened. The neighborhood sounded different, same cicadas, same distant highway, but underneath a new hum group, messages chiming, cameras pinging online, neighbors testing light switches like lighthouses, finding their rhythm. For months, we'd been islands. In one evening, we'd started building a coast. At the corner, Marcus and Hannah stood together beneath their porch light, not as a spotlight, but as a signal. He lifted a hand and I lifted mine back. For the first time in a long time, Cedar Creek felt like it could keep its promises, because now those promises belonged to all of us. The very next morning, Cedar Creek felt transformed. Doors opened early as neighbors stepped outside with fresh purpose. Families posted emergency phone numbers on their mailboxes and front doors. Groups tested new porch light alert signals, while others mounted security cameras under the eaves. What had been quiet fear only a day earlier now pulsed with shared determination. Police officers returned to help. Detective Anderson and Officer Ramirez moved from house to house, gathering witness statements and sorting through screenshots, videos, and receipts. They began the process of recovering money that Trevor's group had extorted, and every new piece of evidence tightened the case. People who had once avoided eye contact finally spoke up. Margaret Lee described the night she was told to replace her curtains or else. Tom Alvarez admitted he had paid a bogus fine just to keep the peace. The Chen family shared photos of the imposters pacing outside their yard. Each story filled in the picture of how fear had allowed the scam to grow. By afternoon, the street already felt lighter. Children raced bikes and dribbled basketballs again. Front porches echoed with laughter and casual greetings. For the first time in months, Cedar Creek sounded like the friendly neighborhood Marcus and Hannah had hoped to find when they first moved in. Yet a reminder of the past lingered. As dusk neared, a black sedan with dark-tinted windows crept slowly down the street. No one could see inside. It didn't stop, but every parent and grandparent felt a chill. Was it just a passerby or someone checking if the neighborhood had truly changed? Standing on their porch, Marcus felt Hannah's fingers tighten around his. He met her eyes and spoke calmly. "Whatever comes, we're ready now." All of us. As the sky turned orange and purple porch lights blinked on up and down the block, not as a signal of fear, but of unity. Neighbors lingered on their lawns, sharing final words and quiet smiles. The black car never returned. What began as one man's defense of his wife had grown into a collective stand. Cedar Creek was no longer a group of isolated households hoping trouble would pass. It was a community that had faced intimidation, spoken the truth, and built practical ways to protect one another. The day closed with a feeling stronger than relief, a quiet confidence that if darkness ever tried to return, every door on the street would open, every light would shine, and no one would face it alone. Weeks later, Cedar Creek felt reborn. Children played on driveways, neighbors chatted at open gates, and porch lights glowed as signs of welcome, not fear. The street that once held its breath now breathed freely. One quiet Saturday morning, Marcus and Hannah were sharing coffee when a message arrived from Detective Anderson. "Trevor Haynes has been released on bail." Hannah tensed, but Marcus simply covered her hand. "It changes nothing," he said. "If they come back, they won't find the same street. We're ready together." That afternoon, the neighbors gathered again, not out of fear, but to affirm what they had built. Margaret Lee spoke first, recalling sleepless nights now replaced with peaceful walks. Tom Alvarez admitted he'd once paid to stay quiet, but now believed silence was the real danger. Marcus stepped forward. "Peace isn't something you wait for, it's something you defend. Together we prove that fear only wins when we stay silent." His words settled over the group like a shared vow. People nodded, children stilled, and the air filled with quiet strength. Porch lights flicked on at dusk, not as alarms but as symbols of unity. As the sun dropped behind the rooftops, Cedar Creek no longer looked like a street that had been terrorized. It looked like a community that had chosen courage over fear. And for anyone beyond that neighborhood, the message was clear: Never stay silent in the face of violence or injustice. Silence is what predators count on. Speak up. Stand together. The fight had changed. More than one afternoon, it had shown that defending peace is a daily act of courage and that a united neighborhood is stronger than any threat.